A drone hovered over a frost-cracked ridge, its camera catching a jet of steam where ice should have been solid. The lens adjusted, revealing a perfect black circle, pulsing faintly, rimmed in frost. Suddenly, the signal cut, then returned, just long enough to show something shift under the surface. A rhythmic knock echoed through the ice, 3 slow beats, then silence. The drone spiraled out of control, just as a shape passed beneath the ice. In a town built on snow and secrets, curiosity flew higher than caution. The village of Rothalden lay cradled in a quiet valley below the jagged line of the Nadelhorn Ridge. Most houses had thick stone walls and steep gabled roofs, built to outlast blizzards and memory. Winters here were long, silent things, broken only by avalanche drills and the low churn of ski lifts in tourist season. The people who lived here, those who stayed through the snow, spoke little of what lay beyond the upper ridge. Too steep for trails. Too old for stories. Dylan Merrick knew the terrain well. Once a mountain rescue worker, now a reclusive vlogger known online for high-altitude drone footage, he had returned to Rothalden for reasons that went far beyond content. He brought with him a new drone, modified with thermal optics, extended battery packs, and a hardened carbon shell. What he was searching for, he couldn't name yet. But he felt the pull of the peak every time he looked up. The footage that drew him back had come from a tourist, a young man whose drone had gone off course during a storm and vanished near the summit. The last 30 seconds of its feed showed an odd, dark patch in the snow. Dylan had watched it a dozen times. What caught his attention wasn't the shape itself, but the temperature readings embedded in the frame, thermal anomalies in a region that hadn't seen warmth in 6 months. He wasn't chasing clicks. He needed answers. Years ago, his father disappeared on this mountain without a trace. The locals had mixed reactions to his return. Some waved with wary half-smiles. Others turned and walked the other way. At a small pub on the edge of town, the bartender pretended not to recognize him. "Still chasing ghosts," someone muttered once behind his back. Dylan didn't answer. He spent his evenings calibrating equipment and plotting flight paths. On a cloudless morning, Dylan launched his drone toward the upper ridge. As it gained altitude, his monitor buzzed gently, the real-time feed sharp and clear. The mountain unfolded below, untouched snow, wind-carved cliffs, and wide shadows cast by ancient rock. Then, the glitch. The drone stuttered mid-flight, its signal momentarily scrambled before correcting. The display flickered and returned, sharper than before. A few frames showed something that shouldn't have been there. A circle. Perfect, black, and pulsing faintly beneath a shelf of translucent ice. Not a shadow. Not a crevasse. It looked almost deliberate. He adjusted the angle, zooming in. The ice rim around it was jagged, freshly broken, as though something inside had pushed outward. He switched to thermal view. Bright orange heat shimmered inside the void. The drone dipped lower. Steam wafted upward in slow, lazy tendrils. Dylan leaned closer to the monitor, heart hammering. The ice around the circle was too smooth, as if cut. There were no tracks nearby, no impact trails. Whatever it was, it had formed, or been revealed, recently. He saved the footage, tapped in GPS coordinates, and recalled the drone. Later that evening, he compared the new data to the tourists' footage. The anomaly had grown. Steam was rising again, but the ice hadn't cracked, it had reformed. This was the same ridge his father vanished near. And now the mountain was stirring again. What the eye missed, the camera had captured. Dylan sat in the corner of his rented cabin, lights off, fingers hovering over the playback bar. The room was silent except for the low hum of his laptop and the occasional crackle of the wood-burning stove. He had replayed the latest drone footage at least 30 times. This time, he slowed it down to a crawl. At frame 937, just before the signal glitch, there it was. A flicker. In the reflective surface of the ice surrounding the black circle, something pale and humanoid stared back. Not clearly. Just enough to know it wasn't him. A long face. Hollow eyes. The suggestion of fingers pressed against the inside of the ice, like someone watching. Then it was gone. Dylan exhaled slowly, hit pause, and leaned back. It wasn't just a thermal glitch. It wasn't a shadow. He had seen something alive. The next morning, despite a storm warning, he packed his thermal gear and climbed toward the coordinates. Ice crunched underfoot, and the wind carved sharp lines across the snow. The higher he went, the less sure he became of what he wanted to find. When he reached the ridge, the black circle had vanished. In its place, the ice had solidified, but it looked wrong. The surface was too smooth, too level. A thin mist still hissed from the seams. Dylan knelt, brushing snow away carefully. Beneath a layer of frost, he spotted something glinting faintly inside. Metal. He unpacked a small hand torch and began melting a narrow patch of ice over the glint. It took 10 minutes before the shape emerged, a flat, rectangular plate embedded beneath several inches of solid ice. He cleared just enough to see what was etched into its surface. Partial markings. Numbers. Letters worn by time. And then, beneath a swirl of frost, a symbol. He scraped again, harder now, revealing the unmistakable outline of a bird with outstretched wings. The tail feathers. The claws. A Nazi eagle. But something was off. The eagle's head had been scratched out deliberately. Not by time, but by force, deep, brutal gouges that erased its identity. And the date etched beside it, 1943. Dylan stood there, breath clouding in the freezing air. 100 thoughts collided at once. Nazi expeditions? Secret war relics? Why here? He turned on his phone, took high-resolution photos of the plate, then knelt again and scraped further. As he scraped the frost from the plate, something shifted, from the inside. The plate flexed, barely, but unmistakably. A vibration passed through the ice like a pulse. Dylan dropped his tool and stepped back, staring. For a moment, everything went silent. Then a faint tap came from beneath. 3 slow beats. Then silence. He backed away slowly, heart pounding. The wind picked up again, flinging powdery snow back over the spot. Whatever had been beneath the ice, it was still there. Watching. Waiting. Obsession grows where logic thins, especially above 8,000 feet. Dylan returned to the ridge 2 days later, not alone this time. With him were Marcus, a cautious engineer with glacier drilling experience, and Liam, a thrill-seeking climber who'd once base jumped off the Matterhorn for fun. Both had followed Dylan's channel for years. Neither expected to be part of it. They brought portable thermal drills, seismic sensors, and a custom infrared scanner Dylan had built himself. The black circle wasn't visible anymore, but Dylan knew the spot by heart. The coordinates hadn't changed. "This ice doesn't belong here," Marcus murmured, inspecting the smoothed-over seam. "Too flat. Like it's been reset." They placed the seismic sensors in a half-moon pattern around the site. Dylan watched the thermal scanner while Marcus calibrated the drill. The first readings were strange. Normally, glacier ice retained a stable core temperature below freezing. But this patch, just 3 feet across, registered faint thermal flares. The readings spiked every few minutes, like a heartbeat. Beneath the ice, something was warm. And pulsing. Liam, never one for waiting, gave Dylan a nudge. "So, we digging into this or what?" Marcus frowned. "It could be a natural vent. A volcanic fissure, maybe." Dylan shook his head. "There's no geothermal activity in this sector. I checked the geological logs. The closest thermal zone is 40 kilometers east. Still, Marcus hesitated. There's pressure building underneath. Could be gas. Or worse. Dylan didn't care. He needed to know. This place, this exact spot, was the last known ping from his father's old GPS, recorded 12 years ago. He tightened his grip on the drill handle. We go slow. Controlled breach. The drill bit whirred to life, cutting into the ice with a high-pitched whine. It met resistance, then a sudden softness. Beneath the surface, the ice was thinner than expected. 3 feet deep, Marcus called. Switching cores. As the drill pierced through, a gust of warm air burst upward, unexpected, pressurized. The team staggered back as the smell hit them. It wasn't just heat. It was breath. Thick, stale, and putrid. Like rotten oil. The mist hung in the air, swirling sluggishly before dissolving into the cold. Jesus, Liam muttered, coughing. That smell, it's not natural. Dylan stepped forward, lowering a thermal probe into the hole. The readings on his tablet spiked again. Bright orange. Liquid heat beneath the surface. Then, movement. Not seismic. Not tremor. Something shifted beneath the drill hole. Just enough to register on the sensors. A slow, deliberate motion. Marcus's monitor pinged. That's not settling. That's pacing. The ground didn't shake, but the ice around the hole began to lightly crack outward, spidering in delicate, symmetrical veins. Dylan stared down into the narrow shaft. There was no echo. Just a hollow hum, as if the mountain was breathing. Would you keep testing, or walk away? As the drill bit cracked through, a burst of warm air hit them, thick with the scent of rotten oil. One video upload turned a quiet town into a conspiracy target. Dylan hadn't meant to share it, not all of it. Just a teaser clip, 30 seconds of steam rising from the ice, the drill footage spliced with the thermal pulse, and a single haunting image of the frost clearing to reveal the old Nazi insignia. No commentary. No context. But the internet didn't need much to go wild. By morning, the clip had over 3 million views. Reddit threads bloomed like fungal colonies, hidden Nazi labs, glacier experiments, Alps doomsday vault. Commenters argued in dozens of languages. Some said it was AI-generated clickbait. Others insisted it was proof of a forgotten SS bioweapon program. A few just posted timestamps of the flickering reflection in the ice and said, "Look. It moved." In Rothalden, things were quieter, but not calmer. The local council issued a notice warning hikers to avoid unstable glacier zones. But at the town's only pub, tensions were boiling. The older residents fell into silence when Dylan entered. A few younger locals asked questions, one even offered to help dig deeper, but most kept their distance. Then came the first real scare. A hiker, an American, collapsed near the upper ridge 2 days after Dylan's clip went viral. According to the rescue crew, he'd been alone, looking for the spot with the hole. They found him delirious, with blistered skin and glassy eyes. The clinic said it was a panic attack, triggered by altitude sickness. People whispered other things. Radiation, said one man in the grocery store. Frostbite hallucinations, muttered another. But Dylan heard the way they lowered their voices when he passed. He felt it in the way the air grew heavier in town, like snow about to fall. That night, Dylan stood in his cabin with the lights off, watching the latest drone scan. The thermal grid was updated every 10 seconds. At first, the feed was stable. Then, the anomaly. Beneath the ridge, where the drill had breached the ice, something moved. Not random, rhythmic. A pattern. 4 steps left. 4 steps right. Back. Again. Over and over. Pacing. Like an animal caged. He stared at the screen, heart racing. There was no sound, no seismic activity, but he could feel it. The way you feel thunder in your bones before the clouds crack open. He emailed the data to Marcus, but no response came. Liam had already gone silent after the last hike, citing bad dreams and a sudden decision to leave town. Dylan wasn't surprised. He stayed awake until dawn, refreshing the thermal feed, watching the thing beneath the mountain move with mechanical consistency. Later that day, he walked through town, past a group of tourists holding up their phones to take selfies with the snow. They had no idea. As he passed the church steps, an elderly woman standing near the gate crossed herself and whispered, "You should stop before it notices you." Dylan didn't answer. He knew now, it wasn't just reacting. The ice was listening. Dylan's thermal drone shows subtle movement under the ice, pacing, almost rhythmic. The ice wasn't just reacting, it was listening. But the truth was far worse. Ice screams as it cracks, it only pretends to be silent. 3 nights after the pacing began, a storm rolled through the valley. Thunder echoed down the ridges like cannon fire, and snow whipped sideways across the village. Most stayed indoors. Dylan did not. At 3:17 a.m., his proximity alarm chirped. The drone he'd left stationary, hovering above the ridge breach, recorded a sudden dip in pressure. Then, without warning, a large fracture appeared on its infrared scan. The glacier had split again. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a jagged scar across the ice shelf. Dylan geared up and hiked straight into it. The wind was brutal, even in the storm's aftermath, but he pushed through. When he reached the breach, he stopped cold. The ice had collapsed inward. A pit had formed, wide enough for a truck to drop through. The snow around the rim was scorched with black residue, and steam still hissed up from below. He clicked on his headlamp and peered down. 10 feet below, partially embedded in the exposed glacier wall, was a rusted steel hatch. Bolted shut. Covered in a layer of frost and age. He climbed down carefully, boots crunching on fractured ice. Up close, the hatch was massive, maybe 8 feet wide, circular, like the top of a submarine. The bolts were rusted, but not broken. A faded symbol was stenciled across its surface, mostly obscured. He brushed it off. The Nazi eagle again, this time intact. Beside the hatch, frozen in a slab of slushy frost, was a body. He didn't see it at first. Just a boot. Then a leg, twisted at an unnatural angle. And then the face, torn, hollowed, jaw agape in a silent scream. The uniform had rotted, but enough remained to see the insignia. Whoever this was, they'd tried to escape. And failed. Dylan swallowed hard, lifted his camera, and took slow, steady shots. Inside the partially open hatch, a flicker of light glowed faintly. He climbed through. The chamber was colder inside than out. Rows of steel canisters lined the walls, rimmed with frost and labeled in a language he didn't recognize. Each was connected by old rubber tubing, looping into a series of corroded machines. Dust coated everything, except for a set of footprints leading to a collapsed desk. Pinned to the wall above it was a map. Brittle and yellowed, it showed the spine of the Alps. Marked in red ink were dozens of circles, perfectly spaced, all labeled the same way. K42 drop zone. He counted 47. All across Europe. They weren't hiding one thing. They were hiding many. He stepped closer. At the base of the map was a journal, soaked in mildew. The last legible entry was scrawled, the ink blurred. We failed. It didn't want replication. It wanted release. He turned as a noise echoed from deeper within the vault. A slow groan, deep and wet, echoed from the next chamber. Not machinery. Something organic. The ice groaned again, long, low, and close. Something beneath the vault floor had started to breathe. What would you do if you found this? The ice groaned again, long, low, and close. Something beneath the vault floor had started to breathe. No one asks how deep the mountain goes, until the mountain answers. Dylan didn't leave the vault. He should have. Instead, he descended further, flashlight in one hand, camera in the other, following the echo of that groan through a series of narrow steel corridors. Every few feet, a frozen pipe hissed softly, releasing bursts of vapor into the air. The place smelled of metal, ammonia, and something older. Earth turned sour. Past the map room was a second chamber. Smaller. More focused. In the center stood a thick glass cylinder, fogged and cracked, like an abandoned aquarium. A rubber hose hung loose from its valve. Inside, floating in viscous liquid, was something pale. Not human. Not fully. The shape was humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, but the proportions were wrong. Too long. The neck bent in a way no neck should bend. Its chest pulsed slowly, though it didn't breathe. He tapped the glass. The thing twitched. He stepped back fast, camera shaking in his grip. The thermal scanner in his jacket pocket began to chirp. It registered a rising temperature, slow, but steady. This vault was heating itself. Not via power. From within. He moved around the tank and noticed symbols scratched into the steel frame. Geometric. Spirals, triangles, intersecting circles. They weren't German. They weren't military. They looked carved, by hand. Or claw. Behind him, a rusted filing cabinet leaned crookedly in the corner. He opened it, revealing sealed folders with brittle covers. The top document, written in stiff, blocky German, had a heading, K-42 Subject Control Log. Dylan flipped through it, eyes scanning lines. Attempt number 5, failed. Subject melted vessel. Attempt number 6, subject resisted sedation. Attempt number 9, broke containment. 1 casualty. Note, subject responds to vibration. Possibly sonar-based perception. He shivered. Suddenly, a low hum vibrated through the floor. Not machinery. Not ambient. A footstep. Far off. Then another. He turned toward the hallway he'd come from, black now, his flashlight barely slicing into it. Something was moving in the dark. He backed toward the tank. It was twitching again. Not violently, rhythmically. Like a sleeper caught in a dream. Or a memory. He scanned the far wall. A steel hatch half covered in frost sat at shoulder height. The latch was broken but still intact. Dylan gripped it and pulled. It opened with a screech. Inside, a ladder. Leading down. He hesitated. Then descended. The rungs were icy. The shaft reeked of damp stone and oil. He dropped 20 feet before his boots hit something solid, a lower vault, darker and older than the rest. Here, the walls were stone, not steel. A second tank stood at the center, shattered. Empty. Black streaks crawled along the floor, burn marks, or dried something else. He stepped forward, boots crunching on what he thought was glass. But it wasn't. Teeth. Dozens of small, serrated teeth. Dylan glanced at the others, wondering if the mountain was answering only him. His flashlight flickered. Behind him, a sealed metal door began to hiss. Something on the other side had waited long enough. In the shadows behind them, a sealed door began to hiss. Something on the other side had waited long enough. Some relics are displayed in museums, others are buried for a reason. The sealed door behind Dylan released a long, mechanical hiss, then cracked open an inch with the whine of old hydraulics. Cold air poured out, sharper than anything he'd felt yet. It stank of rust, brine, and something faintly organic, like stale meat sealed in a metal box for decades. He backed away instinctively, but the door continued to open on its own, inch by inch, revealing a chamber unlike the others. This one was alive. The floor was metal grating, slick with frost. Pale wires pulsed faintly along the walls, connected to ancient machines still humming with intermittent life. The walls weren't stone or steel anymore, they were lined with thick, transparent glass from floor to ceiling. Something swirled behind them in a viscous, dark liquid. And in the center stood the final tank. Twice the size of the last. Bolted to the floor. Reinforced with iron bands. Inside, suspended in fluid that shimmered with strange light, was a creature. Humanoid, yes, but more than that. 8 feet tall. Skin translucent, like a jellyfish stretched over bone. Its ribs expanded in slow, unnatural pulses. The arms were too long, the fingers fused together into webbed, claw-like hands. No mouth. Just a smooth, concave face, except for the eyes. The eyes were closed. And the lids were twitching. Dylan's breath caught in his throat. A small console blinked to life beside the tank. Faint German text scrolled across the cracked screen. Sicherheitsstufe. Object, K-42. Herkunft, unbekannt. Communication, Feldgeschlagen. Nachbildung, Feldgeschlagen. Verhalten, aggressive. Empfohlen, permanente Kapselhaltung. Translation. Security level red. Object, K-42. Origin, unknown. Communication, failed. Replication, failed. Behavior, aggressive. Recommendation, permanent containment. The documents weren't lying. They hadn't created this thing. They'd found it. And they had tried, repeatedly, to understand it, copy it, use it. And failed. Dylan stepped closer to the tank. The fluid inside began to swirl, slow and deliberate, as if reacting to him. He checked the thermometer clipped to his jacket. The room was warming. 0.5 degrees. Then another. Behind him, the control console let out a sharp beep. Chamber temp, -3.4 degrees Celsius. Chamber temp, -2.7 degrees Celsius. Chamber temp, -1.9 degrees Celsius. Too fast. This wasn't a glitch. The creature's lids twitched again, more violently this time. Then stilled. He turned to leave. Now. This was beyond him. Then the fluid inside the chamber began to swirl faster. The liquid formed a lazy cyclone, dragging flecks of frost and rust around with it. The light above flickered. The reinforced glass began to sweat on the outside. His boots slipped slightly on the wet metal grating. He turned to run. Behind him, the generator sputtered to life, one final, choking gasp. And the fluid inside the tank began to drain with a slurp that sounded almost hungry. Behind him, the generator sputtered to life. And the fluid inside the tank began to drain with a slurp that sounded almost hungry. Secrets spread faster than frostbite, especially when they're dangerous. By the time Dylan returned to Rothalden, the mountain was no longer quiet. Helicopters thumped overhead. A dozen unmarked vans had rolled into town under the cover of a late snowfall. Locals were told it was a geological survey. An avalanche risk. A closed zone designation. But no one believed that, not anymore. The footage Dylan smuggled out was encrypted. He kept it buried inside a gutted drone housing, disguised as a broken part. Not even Marcus or Liam knew he'd returned to the vault after that first breach. Not even they would have followed him into what came next. 3 days after the fluid drained, the glacier ridge above the vault collapsed. Emergency broadcasts warned of seismic instability. Military personnel secured the area. Journalists were turned away. Official reports declared the region permanently hazardous. But something had escaped. Dylan saw it in the way the wind shifted above the trees. In the absence of birds. In the way the air seemed heavier in the mornings, as if something invisible had passed overhead. He hadn't just found a creature. He had opened something. At night, he studied the notebook he'd taken from the vault. Leather-bound, pages stiff from age and frost. The writing started out clinical, scientific records, sketches of containment structures, lists of symptoms from exposure. But as the entries progressed, the writing changed. Shakier. More frantic. Less focused on research, and more on warning. One page read. K42 is not the only one. Others slumber in designated zones. They were not placed there by men. We disturbed what older civilizations learned to seal. And then the map. On the final page, a folded parchment marked with dozens of tiny spirals. Not locations. Schedules. Each spiral had a date. And a time. One of them matched the day Dylan's drone had first gone dark. A countdown. He thought of the storm. The timing. The warming chamber. The draining tank. This wasn't about discovery. It was about activation. He sat at his desk, notebook open beside him, heart pounding in his ears. The last spiral on the page had a simple inscription next to it. Vault Zwei, September 20, 2025, 1400 hours. That was yesterday. And no one had stopped it. Later that night, Dylan left the house for the last time. He hiked through the forest behind his cabin, away from the town, the lights, the noise. He carried only his camera, a thermal scanner, and the notebook, now wrapped in foil and sealed inside a waterproof bag. He reached an old cave where his father used to take him, before the disappearance. Inside, beneath a floorboard long warped by snowmelt, he placed the notebook in a hollow and sealed it shut. It wasn't safe with him anymore. They were watching now. Not just from above. But from below. Would you reveal this to the world, or keep it secret? Vault 2's countdown had ended. Yesterday. And no one had stopped it. Mountains can keep a secret, but not forever. Rothalden changed after the breach. The signs were small at first, new fencing erected along the old hiking trails, armed men posing as rescue patrols stationed in areas that had never needed rescuing before. Tourists still came, but they were guided now, herded, never allowed near the upper ridge. And no one flew drones anymore. Dylan disappeared not long after Vault 2's countdown expired. His channel went dark. No farewell post. No final video. The community whispered theories. Some believed he'd been silenced. Others claimed he was working with the government, part of a cover-up. A few said he'd gone looking for the next vault. The truth was stranger. No one had seen him, but his cabin still stood, untouched, buried beneath a season's worth of snow. The power was off. The windows shuttered. But inside, beneath a warped floorboard near the fireplace, something waited. Wrapped in foil, sealed in plastic, lay the black notebook. The spiral map. The schedule. The pages had grown brittle with cold, but the ink was still legible. The final spirals had no dates. Only times. One of them was marked, today. Elsewhere, far beyond Rothalden, red flares had been spotted along another glacier, this one in northern Italy. Satellite footage showed a small fissure had opened beneath a remote ridge. And then closed again. As if breathing. Back in Rothalden, strange animals began showing up at the edge of the forest. Deer with clouded eyes. Birds circling in perfect concentric rings before dropping from the sky. The townspeople spoke less. They stayed indoors longer. They waited for snow that never came. Somewhere deep beneath the Alps, ancient mechanisms stirred, not mechanical, but biological. Rooted not in science, but in design. Not man-made. Not man-contained. Dylan had learned the truth too late. Vault 1 had been a prison. Vault 2 had been a failsafe. Whatever came next, was a wake. And the notebook sat quietly in the cabin, buried under dust and silence. Waiting for someone else to find it. Waiting for someone to ask the wrong questions. To follow the coordinates. To break another seal. Tourists still come, but they walk faster now. They stay off the upper trails. And if they hear a low knock beneath the ice, 3 slow beats, then silence, they turn around. At least, most of them do. Would you have waited 50 years, before pulling up the floor and meeting what was never meant to wake?